Welcome back. You're still watching Network Africa on Channels Television. Now, the United Nations is pointing accusing fingers at peacekeepers from Georgia, France, and another unnamed country, accusing them of sexually abusing children while deployed in the Central African Republic. The allegations include rapes in 2014. However, these allegations came to light recently, causing huge concern to national authorities and the European Union, who are currently carrying out investigations. Well, speaking of abuses, have you noticed a link between underdevelopment and rights abuses, particularly the rights of women? Well, Network Africa certainly has, and at this point we just like to share some very important points with you, and we'll leave you to make the connection yourselves. But first of all, let's take a quick look at the top 20 most underdeveloped countries in the world. Topping the list is the Democratic Republic of Congo. Coming in second is Liberia. Third is Zimbabwe. Fourth is Burundi. Fifth is Eritrea. Sixth is the Central African Republic. Niger is next. Sierra Leone, Malawi, Togo, Madagascar, Afghanistan, Guinea, Mozambique, Ethiopia, Mali, Guinea-Bissau, Comoros, and Uganda. Those are the top 20. And after that, we're going to look at the worst countries to be a woman. This is a list from the United Nations. The first country in which it's the worst country to be a woman is actually Afghanistan. The second is the Democratic Republic of Congo. The third is Iraq. The fourth is Nepal. The fifth is Sudan. Sixth is Guatemala. Seventh is Mali, eighth is Pakistan, ninth is Saudi Arabia, and the 10th is Somalia. Now, joining me in studio to analyze this link even further is Mr. Rotimi Sankore. He is the editor for AfriDev, also known as the Africa Health and Human Development Information. Mr. Sankore, thank you very much for joining us. One thing that stands out in this list to me is the DRC, which is the least developed nation in the world, and it's also number 2 for the worst country to be a woman. So my question is about the connection under development and women's rights.
Okay, so all these countries are in a cluster of the least developed countries in the world. And depending on the indicators you use, the countries shuffle. Now, if you use the UN Human Development Index, it shuffles slightly from what you read out there. So Niger becomes the least developed country in the world based on certain inequalities. The biggest of those inequalities is gender inequality. And the reason why those countries go to the bottom of the development list is that if you take the case of Niger, for instance, where 76% of girl children over a generation have been subjected to forced child marriage, which then removes them from the path to education, from the path to job skills, from unemployment, which then drives the GDP of the country down. So that's why Niger is at the bottom of the UN list that uses a particular set of indicators. Now, next are countries like Central African Republic and Chad, which is 68% forced child marriage. So forced child marriage becomes the common denominator that removes a generation of girls from jobs, from education, jobs, skills, drives down GDP. Now, this weekend, the African Union heads of state are meeting, and the theme is human rights with a particular focus on the rights of women. So the African Union Commission is doing its part to highlight the issues, but many of the member states think that these issues are just symbolic. I can predict easily that Burundi is going to dominate the discussion once it starts tomorrow. Yes. But one of the reasons why even Burundi itself is in that list is also the inequalities, including gender inequality, which then spark a crisis.
Now, I understand that your organization is writing to the AU regarding that, in terms of saying that women's rights cannot be ignored if we're going to see an improvement in the development of these countries. But at the same time, is this something that can happen quickly? Because some of the fundamental issues regarding women's rights is that it's got its roots in culture, and it's got its roots in mindsets. You know, people in those parts we're seeing where the woman is seen as a lesser being. Women should be seen and not heard. Basically, rights that do not exist. So even if you table this matter, we're dealing with lifestyles, to say, you know, that's the best way I can put it. So how do we see a manifestation or get results, even though...
There is no doubt that it's going to take some time to fix,
Yes.
but the point is that we have to start. Because if you look at it conversely, the countries at the top of the Global Human Development Index, countries like Norway, Sweden, and so forth, have reduced these inequalities, and that's where we want to get to. Even if you look inside Nigeria, the parts of Nigeria, like the Northeast and the Northwest, which are the most insecure, also have the biggest gender inequalities. So it's clear that it's a key factor in poverty, in conflict over resources, which at the end of the day is what it is. That's why we have the most conflict in the least developed countries.
Yes.
And we have hardly any conflict in the most developed countries. So once we identify a particular inequality that then drives other inequalities, it becomes really cogent to deal with it and not just think, oh, you know, it's an issue for women. Because at the end of the day, it impacts not just on women,
Yes.
it impacts on the entire society as well.
In truth. My final question is, I mean, we've seen, for instance, a step that was taken in Zimbabwe that was applauded,
Yes.
where child marriage was banned.
Yes.
That's a step in the right direction.
Yes.
I'm just using that as a basis.
Yes.
So what is the first step that needs to be taken to set this ball rolling?
Well, the first step is to identify all the indicators for gender inequality, of which forced child marriage is the biggest.
Yes.
Because it removes women from the path to human development. So the Constitutional Court in Zimbabwe ruled that it's illegal. So we want to see other countries doing that. But that's not enough. You then have to build schools. In many instances, tens of thousands of schools. You then have to train teachers. In many instances, hundreds of thousands of teachers. You then have to equip those schools. For the girls and women that are already in that problem, you have to invest in vocational education for them. You then have to give them small loans to start businesses. If not, you may solve that problem for the coming generation, but because of the social weight of the existing generation, it will then take much longer to resolve. So education will do it for the generation that's coming, but vocational training, small loans, building more schools, and removing or banning forced child marriage will then help to consolidate this and help to drive development based on equality.
Well, Mr. Rotimi Sankore, thank you so much for speaking
Thank
with
you.
us on Network Africa. We certainly appreciate your time.